finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Welcome back to BS Free MD, and today we're thrilled to get into a fascinating conversation with Emma Tekstra, a powerhouse in both the worlds of global health and data-driven wellness. Now, data-driven wellness doesn't sound exciting to you. Just hang on. Emma is an actuary, global health consultant, and the author of How to Be a Healthy Human, What Your Doctor Doesn't Know About Your Health and Longevity. I love it, which would be a whole lot, actually, of information. Originally from Leeds, England, Emma has spent 25 years in executive roles, helping some of the world's largest employers improve health outcomes. And with a deep passion for data, science, and the human body, she now writes and teaches on health, nutrition, and faith, all the three topics I love. She lives in Southern California with her family. Welcome, Emma. We're so glad to have you here on BS Free MD. It's not our Docktails with Cocktails segment. So no cocktails today, but guest segment. So we're glad you could join us. Let's start with your book on how to be a healthy human. You tackle some bold topics about, health, longevity. So can you share with us sort of the drive to write it? What was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a bit of history. It wasn't just one thing, right? But I've been working in corporate America and employee benefits for 25 years, seeing how much money and attention employers paid to health insurance and making sure their employees could afford pharmaceuticals and surgery. But in fact, employees weren't getting any healthier overall. So, life expectancy in the US has been dropping, every year since 2014. It wasn't just a COVID thing. It's been dropping for a while. But, I was distracted. I was busy with my corporate job, lots of traveling. And then 15 years ago, my now 20-year-old son, it's actually his birthday today, he was diagnosed with Asperger's and ADHD, and he had various different health problems. And I started looking critically at what the doctors had been recommending for all of those years. And the light just kind of went on for me. And then over the following years, I fixed my son, mainly through diet and supplements and avoiding any kind of pharmaceuticals. My younger son was 3 at the time, so he's really benefited as well. But in my professional life, I moved into the health practice of the company, the firm that I was working for. And so became really focused on health and wellness. And I was able to bring some of my ideas to bear with clients and the developments in our consulting services. But then COVID hit in 2020, and it got really difficult for me in the US. I was working with colleagues in other countries. We had a lot of doctors on staff in different countries. And, it was fine in other countries to talk about vitamins and getting out in the sun to stay healthy and things like that. And, the first trials of ivermectin came out of Peru. So my colleagues in Latin America, were all about it. This is great. But US leadership only wanted to listen to the Harvard-trained MDs we had on staff and only wanted to push vaccine mandates and isolation to our clients. And I'd share actuarial data about the death rates in 2021. 2020, from an actuarial standpoint, was kind of barely a blip, but 2021 was when things started noticeably going downhill, and healthy working people under the age of 50 were suddenly dropping. And historically, people that go to work every day are typically the healthiest. That's why your employer can get life insurance for a fraction of the cost that you can get it by yourself, or even health insurance. But everything changed with the vaccine mandates that were pushed by employers. So it seemed to me that the consultants, brokers like my firm, we were just as culpable as others in the system, and brokers get paid on commission, right? They get, a percentage of the healthcare premium or the life insurance premium. So I started to question whether there was maybe a conflict of interest with these consultants kind of trying to make your employees healthier or sell wellness programs or whatever. When you're not able to bring people over to your way of thinking, I always think, well, you just need to explain it better or provide more evidence. And so that's when I decided to write the book. I wanted readers to understand the whole picture of how of health. The total reliance on a guy in a white coat is not, and telling me what to put in my body is really not the way to go. So I cover a little how the body works, all very clear with layman's language. A lot of great books out there written by doctors, no offense at all, but, I've really tried to make it as simple as possible so that you can do it by yourself. And then I go into the big three categories of ill health, infectious disease, chronic condition, diabetes, cardiovascular, even cancer, mental health, and show how all health or all ill health is essentially connected. And then there's better ways to address all of these different conditions. I guess the key takeaway is really the overarching context for health and healthcare decisions that you might be faced with. It's really providing a 50,000 foot view. I don't know you or your particular problem that you're faced with, but I want to empower you to think more critically and figure out what might work best for you or your family with tons of resources and reading.
That really gets me excited because we have been kind of, thinking a lot about, okay, what's really the theme of what we're doing with BS-free MD, right? May and I have had a lot of allopathic medicine experience. I was talking to a friend of mine today and I said, look, I've got like between 125 and 150,000 patient visits in my career. So we've seen a lot of stuff, but really, I think, with the MAHA movement and then coming out of COVID and this whole kind of new world, I want to empower people to be their own best doctor.
Right.
Because I think that's really the key. This whole business of don't do your own research is what killed people.
Right.
And I'm waiting for people to wake up because, we've talked to Ed Dowd before and his work with looking at the big picture, essentially the actuarial information.
Yep.
I mean, that's all he's looking at is actuarial information.
Yep.
And you're telling us exactly what he has seen, which is after 2021, when overall mortality should have gone down because you have essentially culled the herd with a pandemic. It went exactly the opposite, and it went in the exact demographic that virtually never gets sick.
Right.
So other people in your profession, they have to know this. I mean, actuaries are the only reason insurance companies make money because you're essentially profits using data.
Right. You'd think. I'm actually sad because Ed Dowd himself is not an actuary. While the actuary is speaking about this,
right? So I find it fascinating that you kind of came from this. You had this, issue with your son, and you said, "Look, I'm an educated person. I can do my own research. I can see if there's a way other than, the traditional psychotropic medications to treat these issues." And obviously they were, and I'm assuming they worked way better than anything that we had to offer in medicine. And so this idea of writing this book and encouraging people to do the same thing, because, and that's what's really hard. Like when the hardest question I think I have to answer since we started the podcast is, how do I know who to trust? How do you answer that question?
Oh, how do you know who to trust?
Yes.
Think critically. Just, really think critically and, look at it. It's nobody can tell you what is going to be right for you. So I think you need to look at some of the wider sources, like my book. Obviously, that's why I wrote it, to understand the context. And then whenever you're listening to anybody, whoever you're listening to, you can firstly, dig into it a little bit. So who's paying for that information? Who's profiting from that information? And then look to yourself. So understand your own body and what's going on in your own family to then figure out, what's gonna work best for me. Is that because something that works for one person just might not be right for you? So, it's not who can I trust? There might be somebody that's very, very trustworthy, but whatever it is they're recommending is just not going to work for you for whatever reason.
Absolutely. The thing I've learned in, when we were practicing family medicine over the years, that people that really did do that, and it usually was parents of really sick kids, that ended up coming back to us, and they were experts in that field, way more than any knowledge that I had. I probably glossed over it in, some form when we were in training in medical school, residency, whatever, because, they had an invested interest. So at that point, yes, I mean, you need to advocate for yourself, for your children, if it may be, because, physicians have limited time, limited knowledge, limited ability to delve into that. And a lot of times will blow you off if they think, oh, this just sounds too hokey, or these alternative therapies just, mostly it's they're not humble enough to say, I don't know anything about it, therefore I'll just dismiss it as being
Yeah.
like useless information or just quackery.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I think that, man, some of the most strong advocates were some of these parents of kids, but other people with some really rare conditions. And they would come in, and ask me questions, or both of us, and I'd be like, good for you. And you know what? I don't even know where to help you because you know more than I do in this field. You're educating me. I can help you with some things. And so I think that is imperative for people to realize that, man, when you do that research, I mean, trust
Yeah.
yourself too. Yeah.
Yeah, trust your own intuition. People really,
Right.
if you look at it. And I think over the years, there's so many doctors that they push back on that. They push back on your intuition. I think it needs to be a partnership with your clinician, and then that's the kind of clinician you should look for, one that's going to listen to you and your intuition and put a little bit of weight in it.
Right. And now with the internet, as our children said, because our adult children in their 20s, like, how did you learn anything without the internet? You had to get books and go to the library. I mean, it was
Yes.
getting information on that. Some of this stuff was very difficult. And now, case in point, right now, I dug out some old medical records that I had this testing done in 2019. I had some of my medical genome done with a naturopath, and some of it I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of interesting. Oh, I'm really messed up, blah, blah, blah. Come, 5 years forward, and I'm thinking, let me go look at that because I'm having quite a bit of troubles. And some of the stuff in there is so for instance, genetic conditions that are pretty rare. Most Western trained doctors hear about it and they just kind of blow it off like, whatever. And I've been, thanks to the internet, research, chat groups, people on forums, I'm like, wow, my colleagues in Western medicine just kind of blow this stuff off when there's a whole lot to it. So it's imperative, I think, that people realize that there's a whole host of resources out there. Find out who you can trust.
Yeah.
And do your own research and be your own advocate because you know your body the best. So
Yeah.
can we go in? Let's talk a little bit about what you wrote in your book about sort of what you found about the pharmaceutical industry and some critical lessons you've kind of discovered and uncovered at Big Pharma and health.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, some of the pharmaceutical products sold for health reasons, many years ago, like arsenic and mercury compounds that we now know to be extremely toxic, right? And you laugh about it, but penicillin only showed up in the 1940s before, those kind of products started falling out of favor. I mean, just think how recent that is. That is
Right.
less than 100 years ago, and we laugh about it, but this is, really, it just shows how we got to where we got to in 2020, just all what's been going on for the last 100 years. But what happened in 1940, suddenly there's one drug, penicillin, that did seem to be helpful and there was an increasing demand for it. And basically what was John D. Rockefeller, with the oil baron, decided that, pharmaceuticals are this really great business opportunity. So he gets involved in the industry. And of course, he wanted to focus on using up the waste products of his petroleum business. So that's what he started to produce, right? And still to this day, you can trace the roots of most of the big pharmaceutical companies to petroleum and chemical companies, and even the experimentation of Hitler's Third Reich. It's really, it's really pretty interesting if you dig into the history. And then you can further trace the connections to big media, right? Because Rockefeller was the first to figure out how important it is to control the media so that you can push the products that you want to sell. He coined the term philanthropy, I can't say this. Philanthropy for profit. It's late in the afternoon. Philanthropy for profit, which is basically giving money to causes that will ultimately provide him with a profit. And again, you can track all of this. And he was the one that actually almost fully funded the League of Nations organization, the health arm of that after World War I. And that essentially evolved into what we now call the World Health Organization. And of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have since perfected the philanthropy for profit idea, basically taken over the WHO funding. So if you dig into some of the history of Big Pharma, I think it would really open people's eyes. That's not necessarily what's going to really be helpful to us. Rockefeller himself died at, I think he was like nearly 98 years old, but he never used his products. He only used homeopathy, right?
Yeah, which is it's fascinating. And the connection, the thing that I find super fascinating about kind of the dawn of Rockefeller medicine is the connection to, Flexner was kind of his boy, which, and Flexner became famous because of the last pandemic.
Yep.
So the swine flu pandemic or, Spanish flu, whatever you want to talk, call it, that's where Flexner made his name through Hopkins. So there's this direct line from, essentially New York or Pennsylvania, depending on what mansion Rockefeller was in, to Baltimore.
Yeah.
And the last pandemic and the debate on, was it miasma that, the miasma theory, was it germ theory? Was it a virus? Was it everyone thought it was a bacteria. It took till people didn't realize they didn't actually agree that it was flu until 5, 6, 7 years after that pandemic. So it was into the 1920s.
Right.
And so Flexner becomes very famous and then writes this amazing report about how anybody that doesn't basically do Johns Hopkins medicine is a quack, gets funded from Rockefeller, and then the whole thing. I mean, that is essentially the birth of modern medicine. And people don't understand this. Like there was all sorts of different medical schools in 1915 in the United States.
Yeah. And a lot of the training was the same. You couldn't really even distinguish between the different medical schools teaching homeopathy or eclectic medicine or anything. A lot of it was similar.
Yeah. But now it's all been siloed, right? Like you have naturopathic medical schools, you have allopathic medical schools, you have osteopathic medical schools. Osteopaths are essentially exactly the same. But I mean, it really, people don't really realize that industry formed this. This was not just science doing science. This was industry doing, quotes, science that then birthed essentially a religion.
Do you discuss much about I think for sure it's the North American attitude. I can't speak for my homeland of England or Europe, but the attitude of, I got to go to my doctor to get a pill for that to fix it. I mean, obviously, when people have colds or upper respiratory infections, it's become the thing. Of course, it's like, heaven forbid, I can't live with a sore throat for 2 days or a week. I just want a pill to make it go away. And same with chronic conditions. It's just easier to take a pill for your diabetes or your blood pressure than to really get to the root cause and work hard. So do you dive much into that in the whole pharmaceutical thing, or is it more the history of how it's influenced people's health?
I touch a little bit just because of my background, and I've seen how how that background has been taken in different countries. So homeopathy was birthed in Germany, of course, but so the US is definitely the worst. That pill for every ill, definitely the worst. But one of the things that really dismayed me in COVID was other countries were looking to the US even more and saying, oh, well, the US has got all the answers, we need to have more pills or whatever. And so that's why I'm speaking out more now, because I'm saying to these other countries, no. You're doing it fine. Traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine in India, homeopathy in Germany, and all of these other modalities, those are probably going to be better for you than doing what we call Western medicine, I guess now, allopathic medicine.
Well, all they have to do is take a look at our health stats, our obesity pandemic, and the health of the nation, and then they can make their educated decision from there, right? I mean, that should be a tell. I mean, and now our children, the rates of obesity, autoimmune disease, I mean, you name it, is
medical
skyrocketing.
Yeah, and the mental health of the kids it's a mess.
Exactly.
So let's talk. One of the questions that we have, you've mentioned turtles all the way down as a resource. When in this journey did you kind of have the vaccine epiphany? See, for us, it was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it's continued to evolve since then. But for us, it was the COVID vaccine. We're like, this doesn't make any sense, And for me, it was a moral argument. It was when they crossed over and they said 6-month-olds can be vaccinated. I said, well, that doesn't make sense because 6-month-olds have absolutely zero benefit from the vaccine. Even if it was 100% safe with which nothing is, they do not derive the benefit, so they should never get it no matter what. And then it was pushed, and I was like, okay, now we've transgressed morality. So then, I started pulling that thread, and all of a sudden you start questioning everything. And then, you get into these other vaccine research books like Dissolving Illusions and Turtles, and you're like, holy crap, I was deceived my entire career.
Yeah. For me, it came with my son. So, because that was 15 years ago. And so I got into all that. So he was 5 when he got diagnosed. He'd had all of the recommended shots up to that age, and he'd been getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And my younger son was 3. And so that's when, the allopathic doctors are telling me one thing and you need to put him on drugs and everything because now he's got all these problems. And I'm like, I finally woke up and I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. And actually, it was an alternative doctor that I went to, Dr. Jerry Arsenal. He speaks out a lot. He speaks at a lot of conferences, and he was phenomenal. And so he educated me in helping me turn my son's health around. He started educating me, and then I started looking into it. And then I started reading and reading and reading. There's one book called, I think, Every Vaccine Causes Harm. And you get into the details of how it's working in the body and what it's doing in the brain. And I think I even say in my book, I said, it's absolutely amazing there's any healthy 2-year-olds running around these days. That is the miracle, that the amazing immune system and the mechanisms in the body can fight this crap that we're putting into it. So yeah, so so for me, it was about 15 years ago, and we haven't done any pharmaceuticals of any kind and no shots or anything since then. My younger was 3. He is so healthy these days, super, super healthy. But then when COVID came along, that's why I was speaking out well before, the mandates came down. I could see the writing on the wall because I knew what had been going on for the couple of decades before that. So the Turtles book, that was just phenomenal to me when I got recommended to that and I started reading that. And, the myth that, vaccines wiped out all of these infectious diseases of old that people used to die of. And, if you bring them back, I've heard with all the new government stuff and RFK Jr. coming in and they say, oh, he's going to, take these vaccines off and take the polio vaccine off. And some governor of a state said, oh, all these diseases are going to come roaring back and you won't like that. Well, I'm sorry, you need to look into the history. I mean, that is the biggest myth. Digging into the historical record, it's super clear that it's hygiene and nourishment, well nourished. The Spanish flu, everybody was undernourished. I mean, that's the problem with a lot of these. And so that, I think, is the absolute biggest myth. And, we've never had a vaccine to cover things like scarlet fever and cholera and typhoid. Where do you think those things went to? So yeah, I thought the Turtles book was absolutely phenomenal.
Well, and that's the thing that just drives me crazy because if you're I was born in 1965, so I'm either the very oldest Gen Xer or the very youngest baby boomer. And, all my siblings are much older than me. Okay. So they were born in the 50s, and then you have the beginning of the baby boom born in the 40s. Well, none of those people got the measles vaccine because it didn't exist until 1965. Right. And so what happened before the measles vaccine?
Right.
Well, everybody got measles. And who died from it? Well, essentially nobody. Right. And so you hear this fear mongering. I mean, we had 7 cases of measles in Fort Lauderdale, and Joe Latipo said, I think people should just do what their conscience dictates. He didn't take really a stand on either side. He just took a moral stand, and everyone lost their mind over 7 cases of measles. And I'm like, you have no memory? Like what happened in 1962? They had measles parties. Everyone got natural immunity, and then no one thought twice about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, measles it can be necessary if you are undernourished and very particularly short is vitamin A that they found is a particular deficiency. If you get measles now, take some vitamin A. This stuff is natural. It works with your body and your body will fight it. So yeah, people, it drives me crazy. In California, we have they shut down Disneyland because there were, 10 cases of measles, and most of those were from people who had been back.
No, exactly. Are you familiar with Peter Abe's work, like Guinea-Bissau?
No,
okay, that is a great thing to look into because him and his wife, this is like 1978. They went into Guinea-Bissau and they started. This is a completely unvaccinated society, and the WHO sent them in there because they had this country had this wildly high measles mortality rate. I mean, it was like 4, 5, 6, 7, 10% or so. It was just insane. And they went in, and the assumption was they were malnourished. And really what he discovered was they were overcrowded. If you had like a really overcrowded living situation, that was the highest risk for mortality for measles. So they started vaccinating with the live measles vaccine, the old school vaccine that we don't have anymore. And it made this amazing difference. And what they found was kids not only didn't die of measles, it decreased their all-cause mortality for other illnesses later
True.
in life. Okay. And then they backtracked and they said, well, if you had measles and survived, or you got the live vaccine,
Yes.
you had an all-cause mortality benefit. And so then they started postulating, holy smokes, there's things that vaccines do that we don't understand what they do. They do something, sometimes good, sometimes bad, that has nothing to do with what we're vaccinating against. And then
Well,
they started.
Okay. It's not
Okay.
necessarily the vaccines do something. It's possibly the virus does something that we don't understand. And if the virus is live and in a vaccine, it gets into you, or you get it naturally. The virus is doing something in the body that helps.
But that's exactly the point. You're making the exact point. So then they started looking at all vaccines. And what they realized is the only thing that they could show an all-cause mortality benefit for was live polio, live measles, and BCG. None of these vaccines are on the pediatric vaccination schedule,
Right.
because we use attenuated vaccines with the adjuvants that do God knows what to your immune system.
Right. Exactly.
So it's fascinating. The whole problem with vaccines is not vaccines. The problem is a misunderstanding of infectious disease, and that some infectious disease is actually beneficial. And people will not. I see 40 patients a day in the urgent care because they've had the sniffles literally for hours. I'm like, it doesn't matter if you're sick, it's okay.
Yeah, there's all this science now that if you have there's one study, I think I linked to it in the book, where they actually correlated the number of these infectious diseases you had in childhood, measles, even scarlet fever, chickenpox, all of them, with your risk of the cardiac problems or cancer later. And your risk fell massively, something like 15% per disease, infectious disease that you had in childhood. It reduced your risk of a chronic condition later in life.
Fascinating.
Very fascinating.
The natural world is so fascinating. It's really
Well, but that's exactly the point. I mean, when they came out at COVID and they were freaking out like we're going to all die from this, I'm sitting there. Wouldn't we have died at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution when everyone was throwing chamber pots out of their second-story window and had no it beggars the imagination. The only way they could be super freaked out about a pathogen is if they designed it. That's the only way. It's the same thing with this H5N1. It does not transmit human to human. It never has. We've known about it for decades. It has never been an issue. If they're freaking out, they're either one of two things. They're either trying to manipulate the population, or they're screwing with it, and it got away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think from an individual perspective, I think the reason they freak out is just pure ignorance. I mean, if you understood how your immune system works, the parts of the body that we all refer to as the immune system, and I've got a cute little picture in my book that explains all the different elements of it. I call it the orchestra. You got your tonsils. People used to take care of tonsils. Tonsils are your first line of defense. They're like incredibly important. Even if they're getting inflamed a lot, they're doing their job. And your spleen and all the different white blood cells and your microbiome. If you even knew a little bit, even as a layman, I use very layman's language, if you understood that a little bit, you would laugh at the man-made notion that you could stick a pharmaceutical in your arm and that's somehow going to do better than your naturally designed immune system, or trick it to get something through a shot in your arm instead of something you're going to breathe through your mouth or your nose. It's crazy. It's laughable.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So they still let you in the corporate world, which I think is wonderful.
Well, I had to leave.
But you do consulting for corporations, is that
I
correct?
do.
For
I
helping.
do. Yeah. No, I did.
So what do you think the biggest issue or error in corporate wellness is?
I think that they're putting too much emphasis and money into the conventional health plan, because they're pushing employees towards conventional doctors and pharmaceuticals and surgeries. And, they pay lip service to what they call corporate wellness. But these kinds of programs tend to be sort of pecked on at the side, and they really tend to appeal to people who are already fairly healthy. And the communications are around, well, here's some wellness things you could do. But if you've got an actual diagnosis, well, oh, well, you need the conventional health plan and we'll happily subsidize it for you. So, it's just backwards, really.
It's so true. I remember those things as far as, the screening. Did you do your colonoscopy, mammogram? Will you get points and a bonus and some $10 coupon and, whatever it may be. Exactly. Yes, all the vaccines and preventative type stuff. And then tracking your steps, or, I mean, if you're fit, then it's like,
Yep.
oh, this is great. I'm getting money because I'm already exercising.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
you're right. As far as everything else goes, it seems to be pretty standardized. I remember even some employees that would come to us. It's like, well, they're not going to help cover me to go to any alternative practice, my naturopath, even sometimes physical therapy. It was just like out of the question. So it is definitely pointed towards that. How do you think, is there any way, do you think in the future that corporate would ever change that? What's the incentive behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I do see some positive signs of change. There's a whole bunch of new health solutions out there that are aimed at, really, really aimed at employers' plans. And, some of them do have direct to consumer offerings. I work with a lot of these companies. It started, more than a decade ago with diabetes. It's a big drain on employers. Lot of all the medications. I won't get into it, Ozempic and things like that. It's a
Right.
whole another story. But, just metformin and some of the drugs, and then you're off work a lot. You got a lot of doctor's appointments. You end up tending to be sick a lot, in the winter and stuff like that. It leads to lots of other problems. So that was the first one, because that was kind of, the priority over a decade ago. And so there were these companies, Omada, Livongo, Vida. You would pay, or the employer would pay, $100 a month or something, and they would coach you into a better lifestyle. They'd look at your diet and things like that, and they would get you off the medication. That was how they justified themselves to the employer, because the employer had been paying whatever they were paying to the pharmaceuticals, $10,000, $20,000 a year. And then they would pay for this that literally reversed your diabetes, taught you new habits, got you healthy again. And then the employer's costs or the insurance costs were dropping. So those were the first ones. But then now there's a whole bunch of other companies that are focused on autoimmune conditions, gut health. You mentioned physical therapy. There's now even better than that. There's these musculoskeletal providers out there that it's all done virtually. You'll have a coach who's a real physical therapist, and you might have one appointment to understand what your needs are. And then you do it through either a device, either your phone, and the camera can see if you're moving. It's called computer vision. And they're really checking to see if you're doing your exercises properly. So there'll be like an avatar, and you can see somebody doing the exercises, and then you're doing them, and you can see how you're doing them. And it's tracking how well you're doing them. And so it's got all that, machine learning kind of possibilities. It really, really gets you well much, much faster, because you're doing your exercises better. You don't have to leave the office to go to physical therapy once a week. So there's all sorts of different kinds of solutions, but they're communicated, as I said, as wellness solutions, and something, well, you could try this if you want. And what I'd rather see is that the employers start with these kinds of programs. Obviously not everybody wants to change their lifestyle, if we call them that. They might want to pop a pill, but I think there's more employees than we expect, and certainly that doctors expect, that would take that kind of an option and do something that's more lifestyle oriented than just popping a pill. Because if they really had the real information as to what their long-term prognosis is going to be and what other side effects and nutrient deficiencies those pharmaceuticals are going to lead to, I think that more people would opt for some of these alternative solutions. So, when I'm talking to employers, I talk about a wellness first approach. And so you subsidize those kinds of solutions, and, money talks. So you actually make employees pay more for the drugs and the surgery, and you don't provide so much as a subsidy for those. So but you'll subsidize more the alternative ones. So, obviously you still need to cover acute care and emergencies, and all that would all be covered. But I think you said, Tim, it's the chronic conditions. That's where allopathic medicine really falls down, is those ongoing chronic conditions that aren't going to kill you anytime soon. And that's where we really need to take a different approach. And that's how I think employers can address it. But I am seeing some positive signs.
Well, that's encouraging. I think, and I'm a primary care doctor, and I was a country doctor, delivered babies, we worked in the ICU, we did everything. And from my perspective, I would completely defund virtually 100% of primary care, because we're the ones that are doing the we're the tip of the spear as far as chronic health conditions. So we're writing the metformin prescriptions, the SSRI prescriptions, the Ozempic prescriptions, the whole deal. And that's the mess. The mess really starts with like my specialty. I think allopathic medicine is great for acute care, for trauma, for, sometimes for cancer and stuff like that. Like, we can debate all of those issues, but clearly where it's failed, as you said, is in chronic conditions. And it's, I have been screaming about this for the last 15 years. I'm like, why are we sending somebody to a doctor that you have to pay a minimum of $130 or $40 an hour to see, when you could spend $35 an hour on a personal trainer and have vastly better outcomes?
Yeah.
And the patient has their mood, like all of them gets better. Their mental health gets better. Everything gets better. But no. We're going to ram them through every 10 minutes and just, tick boxes that we talked about, how many beers they drink and what their A1C is and whether we tickled their feet to make sure that their diabetic retinopathy is in control. I mean, I got a letter from an insurance company that I had not done a diabetic foot check on a patient that hadn't had legs for 25 years.
Yeah, I'd like to not defund them, but I would like to train those primary care doctors. I know there's plenty of them. They don't want to they don't want to learn new tricks. But I don't think we should assume that everybody that's even been doing it 20, 30 years, they aren't open to a new approach. I have certainly come across phenomenal NDs who had completely conventional training, but then they will listen to their patients, and after listening enough, they're like, you know what? I'm going to go to the Institute of Functional Medicine. I'm going to take a course. That's what I would love to see. And I'd love to see functional medicine doctors covered by health plans. And they are more expensive, but you've got to show out, I'm an actuary. It's all about the data. You might have to pay more because it's not a 10-minute visit. It's a 1-hour visit. Mm-hmm. And so that's more expensive. That's $500. Okay. But you've got to pay that $500 now to get them on a really good path, figure out what's going on with them, what are their deficiencies, what's the root cause, what's going on. And then they can maybe see a coach who's then going to implement the program and help the patient implement the program. So I'd like to see more functional medicine. I love functional medicine. I'd like to see that more in the health plan.
Well, that totally makes sense.
Well, yeah. And but the point is, if you spend an hour up front and you actually have a plan, and then you have coaching that helps make the plan, then I don't have to see them every 3 months.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the solution, right? Like,
yes,
you're like, well, you don't have time. Yeah. But if you're not seeing 25 people in a morning, you have all the time in the world.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's all backwards. You try to address a big problem like diabetes and hypertension in a 10-minute visit.
Yeah.
Could barely read through the medication list in that time.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
really.
Well, that's what I mean. But even if you're seeing a doctor who will spend an hour with you, you're not going through what happened to you 10 years ago.
No.
I was in a car accident and I hit my head. I mean, we haven't talked too much about mental health issues, but there's so much where mental health issues and the docs just put them on medication, or the patient comes in and asks for medication. Oh, I think I need this. When so many mental health issues are rooted in actual physical problems. There's so many root causes of mental health issues. And so, so they if they can come in and just get directed to, make you, the individual, think through these things. Don't rely even on the doctor that talks to you for an hour. There's so many things that they can't go through. So that's why I try to teach the individual. You got to take responsibility for your health and think about all these things yourself.
Well, you're going to own the disease regardless of whether you want to.
Right.
So you might as well own the treatment as well.
Yeah.
And that's what I find so mystifying. Like I had this couple come in and they were both morbidly obese. I mean, this is almost 30 years ago. And I just looked at them and I said, this is not difficult. I mean, the implementation is difficult. The understanding is very easy. Yeah. It's very easy. If you are not losing weight, you are consuming too much energy. You're consuming too many calories. You're eating the wrong foods at the wrong time and the wrong amounts. We eat hardly anything. Well, fast forward about 15 or 16 years later, I have moved on to a different community. My brother, who's a primary care doctor, sees this individual. the person had a gastric bypass, lost a bunch of weight, and he said, you have to apologize to your brother. Because when I was telling him that I was basically eating nothing, he would eat 4 Big Macs on his way home and then have supper. But it was my problem because whatever I was doing, it didn't help him lose weight.
Let's talk about some personal insights as well. How do you, I would say, how would you look at, I don't know how long you lived in England, but growing up there and moving from England, now living in Southern California, how's that sort of influenced or changed your thoughts even on health and wellness?
Yeah, I think it's not only living in different countries, but, I also lived in Australia in the 1990s, but I've traveled extensively and I've worked with colleagues all over the world. So it basically, I would say it showed me there's so many different ways to address health, right? I think the principles to stay healthy and live a long life are universal. I summarize 10 principles in my book. But once you have a health issue that's limiting your life in some way, I think there's many, many modalities in which to address it. I lay out some of those different modalities. We've talked about a few of them, homeopathy, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda. Are you into herbs and growing in your garden? What are you into culturally? And look at your culture. Are you a techie and you're into all that measurement stuff? You might be into some of those new health solutions I talked about. A lot of them have apps on your phone and they're tracking different things. So you've really got to look at what you're into as to, what's going to work for you. So I think is probably my biggest takeaway from talking, and especially even with COVID, seeing how all the different countries handled COVID. And, there's not only one way of doing things. And so even for any given issue, you've probably seen, if somebody comes in, a patient, you've probably seen 10 very similar, over the years before. But what is going to work for all those 10 is not the same, because they've got to want to do whatever it is they want to do. And even if it's something as simple as losing weight, it's not just the case of eating lettuce every day, going on a crash diet, and going to the gym every day. There's different ways that people can lose weight. I wouldn't recommend gastric bypass, but, I guess. But there are, there's different ways. There's detoxing and juicing and, herbs and some folks like me, I've heard them on podcasts where they'll focus on getting the supplements into people first before they do anything else. I'm not sure if I, 100% agree, but that is one way. If you're really into, if you've been taking pills, switch your pills out for supplements and talk to somebody who can help you get on a really good supplement routine. And that's going to replace your deficiency in the missing nutrients. And you might start to feel better really quickly. And then you want to eat healthier. Then that salad looks really good to you suddenly. And like the sun's out and I want to go for a walk. And so, everybody's different. So I think that's it. Go traveling, go and see how other people live in other countries and how they address their health issues. But yeah, just to your point, I think that's the biggest takeaway. There's lots of different ways to skin the cat.
Yeah, which is fascinating because it harkens back to when I was in Nepal in 1991 and I had Sherpa tea for the first time. Which is yak milk, butter, and salt, and tea.
Right.
Like, there's not much tea. It is so salty and so buttery. You're like, I can't.
I'm just thinking.
And so I was thinking of this
milk part. No thanks.
I was thinking of this
butter, salt,
and it's like now it's kind of in vogue, right? These salt supplements and all that, and bulletproof, Dave Asprey's bulletproof coffee where you put butter in it and all that. And I'm like, these guys were doing this for the last 6,000 years.
Yeah.
What about, I'm thinking, with your background in data and consulting and, your own personal experiences with your son and maybe whatever else in your family or your personal life health-wise, how do you kind of balance the scientific data rigor with the human, what's best for me as a person type of thing? Any sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really great question for me, because I tend to take a super data oriented approach.
Right.
There's a wrong way and a right way to do something. And, if you give me clear scientific data, I'm just going to do it. Right. If you show me a blood test and you're intolerant of gluten, I'm not going to eat gluten. But, I know from experience, certainly the individuals that I've worked with and tried to help, that you really have to take ownership, to your own health, as we've said. And it's not always in the data. You can take your annual blood tests and there's lots of health issues that don't show up in the regular blood test. So it's not all about data. And so, employers can feel that they're going to be mean to employees if they take all this data and say, well, it's going to be cheaper if we pay for your one-time functional medicine doctor and then a coach, as we were saying, and we're not going to pay for all the regular visits every month that you have to get. So yeah, the data does something, but I think we can get too hung up in the data a little bit. And so, statistics has its limitations. I've also got, really deep faith in God, and there's way, way more that we don't know than what we do know. Yeah, every time I find out something else about the human body, it like blows my mind. It's amazing. And it's like, oh, that's why when you do that happens. It's just really incredible to link all the dots together.
Right.
I've known a grandmother that smoked a pack of cigarettes every day and died perfectly peacefully in her 90s. There's just so much that we don't know. So, and humans interacting with other humans is really, really powerful. I tell the story of the little town of Roseto. You ever heard that? It was in, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so they can't figure out, why are they all living so long and there's no health problem, heart disease compared to the other towns in Pennsylvania. They'd all come from this little town of Roseto in Italy. And they're looking at, what is it, the food that they're eating? They come from Italy, they're eating a lot of olive oil, or, what is it that they're eating or doing? They're all doing manual labor. But when they really got into it, they weren't anymore. They adopted a lot of the US style living, and they were eating pizza and drinking beer. And what they found, the only thing that was different in this little town in Pennsylvania with all the other towns, was that the social connections.
Yeah.
They lived in, they had the grandparents living in the same home with the grandchildren, so multi-generational homes, and everybody met every day in the little town square around the church, to gossip and get together. It was all those social connections. So there's so much that we just don't know. And so yes, I love data. I'm a data geek, but don't, and don't, just focus on those trackable apps and tracking my steps. And if I'm doing 10,000 steps a day, I'm good. It's way more than that. So the data has limitations. It only takes you so far.
I know there's so many people now I hate to use the word space, but the searching for the longevity thing and the, whether it's Peter Attia or any of these others, and they're looking at, you're right, that town as well as like all the blue zones and what are they doing? And so let's get the data and how can we find the common denominator and what can we do? And you're right, though, there's so much more to it. And I don't know, the human body is so complex.
I agree with Sean Baker. If you're under 100, you don't get to give a longevity.
Exactly. That's good. I love it.
And it's just like, because it
reminds. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, but it just becomes ridiculous. Because it's, again, I'm a 10,000 foot view guy. For me, it's the assumptions. You get to the assumptions. The reason vaccines have the power they do is because of the assumption of the deadliness of infectious disease. It's a faulty assumption that allows this other thing to happen. And it's the same thing that happens in biohacking. It's the assumption that you can hack. Well, maybe you can't. Maybe the ultimate biohack is Carnivore Aurelius living in, Costa Rica and sunning his, perineum every 2 days or whatever it is. I mean, whatever the wacky thing. I mean, maybe it's so primal that the ultimate hack is just the most primal life you can have, because we don't live in a natural environment. And thank God we don't. I live in a hurricane-proof house.
Right.
I'm very thankful for that. But it's so funny because these words just become almost gibberish to me after a while, because it's like, we're not going to live like cavemen. Yes, you will die of an infectious disease if that's the case, because you won't have hygiene and you won't have clean water and all these. So, cut through the noise.
Yeah, but then people throw up their hands and say, oh, well, nobody knows, therefore I might as well carry on eating my cheeseburgers. But, there are some universal truths, right? I think what I say to people, if they really just don't know, and who do I listen to? I'm like, okay, if it didn't exist 100 years ago, it's probably bad for you. And just kind of focus on that. Because, the people 100 years ago, especially those that were living on the farms, or, Rockefeller, who lived actually a very natural life, ate, real food, grew food, didn't use any of his pharmaceutical products. If you're living more naturally and you're reducing your toxic load, then that's really going to be the better way to go. But it's, it's a combination of every second you're alive. If you think about, I'm in my mid-50s. If I add up all the different seconds I've been alive, it's every single thing that has happened to me, all the different seconds that I've been alive. I don't wake up with heart disease one day. You don't wake up with cancer one day. It's every single thing. It's your human experience that you've had. And it's like your fingerprints. Nobody, no single other human has ever lived that has had exactly the same lifetime as you and all those different seconds that have had positives and negatives. There's lots of positives. You're eating really good food. You're laughing. You're watching a funny movie. You're hugging somebody. These are all really positives. And then you've got all the negatives, right? Some toxin, you've got some vaccine put in your arm, all of those negative things. But nobody on the planet has ever had your exact combination. Therefore, what's going to result in your longevity is going to be completely 100% unique to you.
Perfectly said.
Man, I feel dumb.
That
was awesome.
A good
That's the
explanation.
excellent talking.
No, that's like one of
That
those
was
great
brilliant.
explanations. And I was thinking,
Absolutely
earlier
brilliant.
about what is it? Wasn't it Al Roker that used to have those people on a show, or brought to you by Smuckers? When these old folks lived to 100, they got to go on the Today Show or something.
Yeah,
and
right.
State their name and how they lived to 100, and it was so across the board. But it's basically that. It's your lifetime, your positive and negative things that affect your health are so unique to you that you're right. You can't really write a book on it because it's so variable. Although there's some common truths.
Yeah.
Which is, the world is so changed. There's many positives of how we've come along in health, but man, I think the negatives almost outweigh it with toxins and what we've done to food and what we've.
But there's way more to it. I think the spiritual connection. I think the social connection.
That's
and
changed.
and I think those things are so unbelievably powerful for longevity. Like, when I look at my grandfathers, they were born in 1900, and one lived to just about 89, and the other made it to 98. And their level of connection to not even just their families, but to like colleagues.
Yeah.
They would always meet for coffee at a certain time when they were retired. They would,
Mhm.
when they were working, they were always negotiating deals, and it was and like, we have this work at home thing and cell phone screen times. I mean, that may end up being far more toxic, not from the
Absolutely.
EMF,
Yeah,
but just from the dehumanizing part of it.
absolutely. I agree. Totally agree. 100%.
Yeah.
Humans need other humans.
We got to start doing the show on the road then. Stop doing it via Zoom.
Yeah.
Well, if we can be successful enough, we'll just fly everybody in. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I mean, you can't beat that.
I used to laugh about my grandparents going to the Elks Lodge and the Moose Lodge and the Shriners and all those social clubs. But I mean, really, it's all about connection and serving and
No, like almost every night was a
serving
different
someone other
social
than
interaction.
yourself.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Well, I mean, get in a church. That's the best way to do it.
Right.
Church is something going on every single day of the week, and where you need to be together for spiritual reasons, but also health reasons. I mean, there's all sorts of science on it. The book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. Are you familiar with that? It's
No.
decades old. This book, decades old, and it's all the science about the problem. Well, it's a little bit how the US has been moving away from all of those different kinds of social clubs, but all the negativity and how bad it is for your health. It's got all these scientific references as well. Great book.
Well, we would totally agree with you on the thoughts of that spirituality is, that's the big part of your health. That's why we always said in our show, it used to be on our website, where it's all about physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health is the pillars of which really influence things. And I think that's taken usually it still takes a back seat, and really, now and then people focus on, especially cancer healing and things, something really serious, but in day to day, it just gets
But
tossed.
it's still fascinating, because even in this sort of I remember when I was working for a large 7-hospital system, and they still commodified alternative medicine. It wasn't like, so they put it in a box and they said, we're going to have this thing and we're going to control it because it's another revenue source for us. And it's kind of like what's happened with mental health therapy. It's like, you go to this person who you pay to be your friend, when you used to go to Bible study
Or the
Exactly.
bar.
Yeah.
and it was the exact same experience.
Yeah.
But it was free because you would sit around and, share prayer requests or clink
Yeah.
glasses or whatever the social
Yeah.
contact was. Now we have to pay somebody to tell
Totally.
us why we feel crappy, when why
Yeah.
we feel crappy is we've isolated ourselves from reality.
Yeah, that's one of those things that the US has been exporting. I mean, even years ago, when I first visited the US as a teenager, it was everybody has a therapist. So that, and other countries, I have to say, laugh at the US. Everybody has a therapist, but other countries are now doing it. It's horrifying.
I think we just need to be like Norway and Sweden. Just get out there and cross country ski and get with nature and get in tune with. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's one of my principles. Get out in nature. The science around what nature and seeing nature does for our health is just unbelievable.
Yeah, but we've demonized the sun.
No.
Like nothing exists on Earth.
Just 70 crap on your skin that's probably contributing to your skin cancer. Yeah. Get in the sun.
It's petroleum.
Yeah.
The PAVA-based sunscreens. No, it's like nothing on Earth exists without the sun, but the sun is somehow bad.
I know, right?
Ironically.
You can survive without it. Create vitamin D in our skin, for goodness sake. Don't block it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's wild.
On that note, I get to go tomorrow to the dermatologist.
Yeah, I know.
Where they get to school me again on my SPF and hack off some more
Oh,
moles.
no.
I just in one ear, out the other, cut it off. I'll be fine.
Well, we would love to keep this conversation going for a long time, but ironically enough, we do have a Bible study group to go to tonight too.
Yeah.
And we know your time's precious too. So we're going to wrap up. But before we close, a couple things we like to do. And one is to do a fun rapid fire segment with our guests that just is kind of fun. And don't worry, it's not too intense or out there.
Yeah.
So these questions are a bit more personal. They're kind of like first thing that comes to mind, one word or one sentence answers. So we got a couple for you. Tea or coffee?
Oh, yeah, British. Love it.
Great.
What's one British habit you'd say that you've kept since moving to the US, other than the tea?
I'm sorry, it's afternoon tea. That's the only one. I'm there walking, I'm like Pavlov dogs. I'm salivating for my tea.
That's awesome. I love it. What's the one health myth you would think that everyone should stop believing?
I think that pharmaceuticals and modern medicine is what's made us all live longer. Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, I could not agree more.
And then besides your own book, any other favorite books that shapes your views on health?
There's so many books, and I've got a whole further reading appendix in my book. But I think in terms of my broad views, and it's not an actual health book, but I'd say Willful Blindness by Margaret Hudman. You guys familiar with it? Awesome.
No.
Also, oh, you got to read it. So yeah, it's just about how we make decisions and how we are blind to things, that all the information coming at us and things that are right in front of us.
Have you read Marty McCary's book, the new one with the things we overlooked, or however
Blind Spots? I think it's called Blind Spots.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. I think I flipped through some bits of it. Yeah. But yes,
because that one looks really interesting, especially as he's kind of coming into the administration and whatnot. And I mean, to hear him go off on how we absolutely screwed an entire generation of women out of hormone therapy because of just terrible science.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, that's one of the examples.
Yeah.
So fascinating stuff.
Well, I'm going to let you share where our listeners can get your book, or we know you have a Substack. So you want to talk about where they can find you on those platforms?
Yeah. So just the spelling of my name, get that right. So it's Emma Tekstra, Tekstra. So go to my website, emmatekstra.com, Substack, Emma Tekstra, simply. Books available everywhere. Good books are sold. You get it on Amazon or wherever.
Wonderful. We will share the links in our show notes, of course. And we thank you again for being here. This has been fun and, shed some light even on some things that we didn't really know. So thanks for sharing with us. And we hope our listeners snatch up that book and get some really good tips and insights, and the historical part too about the pharmaceutical industry, I think would be really eye-opening. All right. All right, everybody. So remember to check out her websites. And if you've enjoyed this show today, please share it, leave us a review, and stay tuned for more BS-free conversations next week. It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS-free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS-free-MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS-free-MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.